I'm Julia Jenaé in for Vinnie Politan tonight. Thank you for being with us for Vinnie Politan Investigates. And the subject of our investigation is the Menendez brothers, Erik and Lyle. After murdering their parents, Jose and Kitty, 35 years ago, they avoided the death penalty, and there's now a chance that they could be free men. Here's the story. On the night of August 20th, 1989, the Beverly Hills mansion of Jose and Kitty Menendez became the scene of unimaginable horror. Lyle and Erik Menendez, their own sons, fired shot after shot, cold-blooded, merciless, and leaving their parents unrecognizable. It's a crime that shocked the nation. Two privileged young men drowning in wealth turned savage killers. At trial, they claimed they weren't monsters, but victims, claiming their father was a tyrant and their childhood a nightmare of abuse and molestation. The jurors were split. Was it cold-blooded murder or a desperate act of survival? A second trial would end it. 2 life sentences, no parole. Now, 3 decades later, the brothers are fighting for their lives, now armed with new alleged evidence of abuse and support from advocates who see them as survivors, not killers. Social media campaigns have demanded their release. Even the Menendez family is supporting their freedom. Will they ever walk free, or will the world remember them only for the night they murdered their parents and covered it up? And the support there can't be understated. They've got support from everywhere, from the public, from the victim's family. It's something that's crucial in a case like this, especially 2 people who admitted to killing their parents. But what's most important is that legal support that they've been getting. And by their side through this resentencing process and demand, they have famed attorney Mark Geragos there in California, who has been helping them get their case in front of various judges, various avenues, trying to seek freedom. Here Geragos is speaking after a recent hearing.
Today is a good day. Justice won over politics. It's been a long time coming, probably the biggest day since they've been in custody. I'm going to let them talk. I'm going to just say a couple of things. We heard and saw a lot of performative art, performative theatrics from the DA's office.
And the DA's office is who is going to be bringing this case in front of a judge, along with the defense team that has arguments as well. So that brings us to our first question in the investigation. What exactly is life going to be like if the Menendez brothers are released? What will it be for a 54-year-old Erik and a 57-year-old Lyle? They've been behind bars for 35 years. Here with us to discuss, we have former deputy public defender for Los Angeles County, the county where this is happening. Philip Dubé is with us, and forensic psychiatrist, a trial expert witness, and author and columnist, Dr. Carol Lieberman, with us as well. Thank you both for being with us. Philip Dubé, let's talk generally about if that release happens. What happens to the Menendez brothers? Where do they go after they're released?
It's a great question. First of all, they're going to get what's called gate money. In California, the Department of Corrections gives every parolee upon their release a whopping $200. It's basically cab fare to get them home. And hopefully somebody will be there to greet them at the gate, get them a ride. Maybe they'll send a car, but nonetheless, they'll have some pocket money just to tide them over until they get situated. But then, as a practical matter, depending on which way the courts go, if parole is, let's say, for example, they are resentenced to life with parole and the parole board does decide to parole them, then they will be on parole. And what that means is if they are resentenced to a second-degree murder, then they are presumptively held on parole for a minimum of 5 years. First degree, it's 7 years. And during that time, they have to obey all laws. Period, because otherwise the parole board has the discretion to keep them on parole for the rest of their lives. Additionally, every time they violate parole, they can be sent back into custody. So you're kind of like on probation for the rest of your life unless the parole board decides to discharge you from parole. But Separate and apart from that, it sounds like that they're going to seek an interstate transfer of parole and likely move maybe to the East Coast or somewhere where they have relatives where they'll have a fixed address and family who can take care of them until they get situated. But initially, it's, to quote the late Jackie Gleason, how sweet it is. They're going to be at liberty. They'll have a new leaf on life and a fresh start. I don't think they will be hounded as much by a lot of our, younger celebrities or cause celebs that we have in the news, because most people really remember images of these men from how they looked back in the late 80s and the early 90s. And since that time, they have ripened really into handsome, middle-aged men where they'll kind of blend in with the rest of society, almost like nondescript type men just living their lives. So I don't think that they will be hounded or bothered at all by the public. But I do think it will open doors for them employment-wise, vocationally, financially, and hopefully they can have a life in the future and get on their way. I do predict it's going to be successful and that society will treat them kindly.
Dr. Lieberman, I hear you reacting to Philip saying they can just ease back into society because they've turned into handsome men.
Yes, and not recognized, right? Well, that's wishful thinking, I think. First of all, anybody in prison becomes institutionalized. And when you've been in prison for 35 years, it's really hard to get out. And, when you're in prison, everything is you're told when to eat, when to sleep, everything is sort of organized for you. When you go out, they're going to be like kids in a candy store. First of all, there are going to be all these groupies who, I like the idea of them being moved somewhere. I don't know about, I don't think it should be in a city. I think it should be somewhere somewhat separate. Not because there are going to be women, who are going to be groupies, who have been groupies for them for all these years. That's number one. There's going to be a media circus, number two. Depending upon who and how in their family, if they take care of them, the more the family takes care of them and tries to keep them sort of, tries to let them get back into society in a slow way, the better it is. But it's going to be very hard to, especially the way, think about it, the way they were before they went in. They killed their parents. They went on this shopping spree, for example. Now, I don't know how much money they're going to have, so they might not be many shopping sprees in their future. But, of course, they're probably going to get offers for things. But in any case, I think it's going to be a lot more difficult. I don't think they're going to be able to fade into obscurity because people aren't going to let them do that.
You mentioned that support system and the family that has been surrounding them. Let's listen to family members of not only the Menendez brothers, but of the two victims in this case who have commented publicly a lot. Here they are commenting on a recent string of developments.
And I'd like to start with Governor Newsom's actions yesterday. They are a positive step forward towards Erik and Lyle's release. We are incredibly grateful that Governor Newsom is paying attention to this case, particularly those of us, those older family members, my mother, Terry Baralt, Joan Vandermolen, Kitty's sister. This is for our family. It is a huge sigh of relief. Erik and Lyle have changed countless lives since their conviction in 1996. Inmates have seen it, corrections officers have seen it, and now we need the entire criminal justice system to see it.
Well, we heard from the LADA's office the other day felt very disparaging. It felt like a continuation of the narrative from 1989, and very honestly, it was very frustrating.
It felt extra hurtful because it was only a few weeks ago that dozens of us sat in his office and described to him the horror of being in this victim's family, with 35 years of being re-traumatized over and over and over. With my 85-year-old mother with cancer sitting 10 feet away from him, literally sobbing in front of him. And then to see him decide to go make a press conference that didn't have to be a press conference, and just in gruesome detail and even a little bit embellished. There were details that weren't even accurate as far as the original crime scene. So that felt really hurtful.
Dr. Lieberman, the family really not happy with any blocks to them getting released. But let's put aside the fandom, the groupies, everything about their popularity and perhaps even their wealth. But what is your biggest concern when someone has been behind bars for this chunk of their life? They went in when they were in their late teens, early 20s, and coming out now in their 50s.
Yes, and life is very different than it was at that time. They're going to have to adjust to a lot of things in this world. They're going to need to get jobs, presumably. And what are they? They're going to have to find some skill. But here's the thing. First of all, I don't think that they're going to be able to pass the requirements to get paroled because, as the DA was saying, they need to be able to express sincerely. They need to have insight. They need to have some kind of, they need to appreciate and be able to tell that they did this, that their mother didn't poison them, that it wasn't, that they weren't really afraid that night of that their father was going to kill them, that they set it up like a mafia hit. So many lies. And what I really think, and I mentioned this to Vinnie earlier on a show, I think that they should not be paroled together. I think that Lyle should be kept in. Lyle is a sociopath, and he is not going to be able to give insight and give, say that he regrets what they did and all that. I think Erik can, and I think it might be better to have one come out at a time. Let Erik get adjusted to the world and help Lyle when Lyle, comes out maybe in 5 years later.
Dr. Lieberman, thank you so much for your analysis. I know we have to say goodbye to you, but Philip Dubé is here the whole hour. Coming up next, what is the process of getting released? What does it look like?
Have to make that decision, and that decision is the court and the courts alone to make.
Did you ever consider not taking her, not killing her? You never intended to let her go.
Never.
Pure evil.
Interview with a Killer season premiere. Encore presentation tonight at 10 on Court TV.
Entire family was slaughtered.
I tried to get them out. I wish to God it had never happened.
That's not really how God works, is it?
Interview with a Killer. New episode Sunday at 8 on Court TV.
For many years, I struggled to terms with what happened to my sister's family. It was a nightmare none of us could have imagined. But as details of Lyle and Erik's abuse came to light, it became clear that their actions, while tragic, were the desperate response of two boys trying to survive the unspeakable cruelty of their father. As their aunt, I had no idea of the extent of the abuse they suffered at the hands of my brother-in-law. None of us did. But looking back, I can see the fear intention that their father had instilled on them. They were just children who could have been protected and were instead brutalized in the most horrific ways.
Were they victims or villains? The Menendez brothers, could they have been both simultaneously? Truly, their family members, the ones that have supported them, believe that they were victims in all of this and that they deserve a resentencing, that they deserve to be released despite a life without parole sentence. And it seemed like this was the point in time where they would have the most hope for getting released. They had the support of the district attorney there in Los Angeles, George Gascon. Then there was a changing of the guards. And now a newly elected DA, Nathan Hochman, has said that he doesn't support a resentencing, but he did give an option. He gave an ultimatum to these brothers, the brothers who were convicted decades ago of killing their parents. And the district attorney explained what they must do in order to get out.
We are basically, in some ways, offering a path to the Menendez brothers. And here's what the pathway looks like. If the Menendez brothers at some point unequivocally, sincerely, and fully accept complete responsibility for all their criminal actions, acknowledge that the self-defense defense was phony, and their parents weren't going to kill them the night of August 20th when they murdered them in cold blood. Acknowledge that they suborned or attempted to suborn perjury in all the various ways I have outlaid. If they go ahead and finally come clean with the court, with the public, with the DA's office, with their own family members, and acknowledge all these lies, and then can be said to have fully and completely accepted responsibility for their actions. In the future, the court can weigh these new insights into making a determination as to whether they now qualify for rehabilitation and resentencing. While the Menendez brothers persist in telling these lies for the last over 30 years about their self-defense defense, and persist in insisting that they did not suborn any perjury or attempt to suborn perjury, then they do not meet the standards for resentencing. They do not meet the standards for rehabilitation. They have not exhibited the full insights and accepted complete responsibility for their actions. And as a result, just like in the Sirhan case, they pose an unreasonable risk of danger to the community, and the resentencing should not, therefore, be granted.
Now, the supporting family of the Menendez brothers, they say they've heard remorse from the brothers in their private conversations with them. It just hasn't been public. And is public remorse required for a resentencing? That leads us to our next question in this investigation into the Menendez brothers. What is the process of getting released? Let's bring back in our guests who are standing by, still with us. Former Deputy Public Defender for Los Angeles County, Philip Dubé, is here. And joining us, someone who led members of the New York City Corrections Officers Union, spent 25 years as a corrections officer, and founded a reform group to end generational incarceration. We have Elias Hussein with us. Thank you both for being here. Philip, let's start with this idea of remorse. Is it required when we know there's separate processes that could potentially lead to the release of the Menendez brothers, but for resentencing specifically there in the trial court, is remorse going to be required?
Remorse is not required by law. As a matter of statutory law, it is not required. There is actually a statute in the California Penal Code that actually precludes the parole board from requiring a prospective parolee or inmate to admit guilt as a condition of release on parole. And it's then followed up by case law. You cannot do that. If you do that, then you're trying to augment the statutory requirements beyond what the legislature had enacted. So it is simply not the law. It might be wishful thinking on the part of prosecutors. It might even be wishful thinking on the part of the public. But for the defense, it is simply not required. All that they have to show, really, is that it would be in the interest of justice to release them. That's the bottom line. And how would it be in the interest of justice? Well, the court will look to the disciplinary history. If there have been no brushes, no write-ups, no new crimes, no criminal prosecutions, they're ahead of the game. Because many inmates, they have write-ups, they have violations, they're put in the SHU, they're put in isolation because they can't adapt to a regimented institutional setting. But these men adapted. Additionally, they have to show that they're not at risk of committing what we call a super strike, meaning that there is no evidence that they will commit another murder, that they won't go out and assault somebody with a machine gun, that they won't solicit someone to commit a homicide, and certainly that they have been rehabilitated, but not in the sense that they've had that come to Jesus moment and they're willing to admit guilt and that they've lied.
Elias,
what they need to...
yeah.
Go ahead. I'm sorry.
Well, let me bring in Elias to the conversation, because Elias, you've got such an extensive experience as a corrections officer in the corrections system. Talk about whether or not you think that they have been rehabilitated, or whether this remorse and all of the things that the district attorney is asking for, if that's a reasonable request.
The reality is that we'll never know.
Everything he said is correct. You never know. I mean, I did 34 years. I have siblings who did time for felonies, not murder, but serious felonies, and are home and struggling to, still at this state to fit back into society. But you're never going to know whether or not there's remorse or anything. We have inmates who are in jail for murder and different things, and once they got arrested, once they got sentenced, they didn't commit any more crime. They didn't commit any murders. They became model inmates, helping other inmates, other incarcerated people. There's just no way that you're going to know. I mean, but if they're released and they come home, it's going to be one hell of a battle for them, in my opinion, because their case is so high profile. Like, where are they going to go? Where people are not going to know who they are. But there's just no way, Julie, to know whether or not they're actually remorseful.
And Elias, a follow-up, the process for getting released and what happens after you're released. Can you talk about that and perhaps some issues? I know you are focused on reform for some of the things that happen when people are released.
Well, when they get released, if they didn't do their time, they're going to get out on parole. They're still going to be under the supervision of the Department of Correction or the criminal justice system. They're still going to have to report to a parole officer. They're still going to have to read and meet certain requirements in order to stay out, because at any time they can be what's called violated and sent back in if they don't comply, if they don't abide by the rules of being released. So, to be honest with you, I don't see these guys coming out. If they release them, I don't see them getting a job. The only thing these guys could do is what a lot of people in their circumstances who are released do. They become entrepreneurs. They become self-employed, because that's really the only way, because what are they going to put on the application?
Elias Hussein, we appreciate your analysis and walking us through that. We're going to, of course, keep everyone updated on what happens in this case. Philip Dubé is staying with us. Up next, we're going to talk about another topic concerning the Menendez brothers. What's their financial situation going to be like? Welcome to Vinnie Politan Investigates. I'm Julia Jenaé, filling in for Vinnie Politan tonight. And the subject of our investigation is the Menendez brothers. They were convicted of killing their parents more than 3 decades ago. It was really the first huge trial here on Court TV back in the 90s. And now they're fighting for a chance at parole. Here's the story. On August 20th, 1989, the privileged world of Lyle and Erik Menendez shattered in a storm of gunfire and blood. Their parents, Jose and Kitty Menendez, were slaughtered in their Beverly Hills mansion, shot repeatedly with a 12-gauge shotgun. At first, the brothers played the role of grieving sons, but their extravagant spending after the murders raised suspicions. Soon, the truth became clear. They had pulled the trigger. At trial, they didn't deny the killings, but claimed that years of sexual, physical, and emotional abuse had driven them to take the life of their parents. The first juries deadlocked, but the retrial sealed their fate. Life in prison, no parole. Now, decades later, the brothers fight for their freedom, looking to be resentenced and released on parole. But will the justice system see them as redeemable survivors or ruthless murderers who can never be free? Money is something that's inextricable from this case. It had to do with the motive that the prosecution brought up for these 2 sons killing their parents, all in order to get money, changing of wills, wanting life insurance money. It also served as the evidence of consciousness of guilt, because after the killings, when they claimed this was a mob hit, we had nothing to do with it, they were found spending hundreds of thousands of dollars. And the prosecution, in the opening statement in that first trial for the Menendez brothers, they talked about that money and the life insurance.
Shortly after the killings, Lyle Menendez began to spend money, a lot of money. On Thursday, August the 24th, he, in the company of his brother, purchased 3 Rolex watches and some money clips. On September the 8th of 1989, 19 days after the killings, a life insurance policy which had been procured earlier by Jose Menendez was paid to the defendants. The policy cumulatively was for $650,000, and over a period of a week between September the 8th and September the 15th, $325,000 was paid out to each defendant. Lyle Menendez returned to the Princeton, New Jersey area after a memorial service for his parents, which was held in Los Angeles on August the 25th of 1989. Lyle Menendez had been a student at Princeton University in the spring of 1989, and the family had lived in the township of Princeton before moving to California earlier. During the initial few days of his stay in Princeton, Lyle Menendez hired bodyguards to guard him. Lyle Menendez and his bodyguards traveled around Princeton in limousines during this period.
Now, the spending wasn't entirely out of character for these young men. They had lived a life of luxury. Their parents were very wealthy. So with the subject of whether or not they should be resentenced, whether they should be released into society, it brings us to our next question in the investigation. And that is, what will their financial situation be like if they are released? Let's talk about it with our guest, still with us, former Deputy Public Defender for Los Angeles County, Philip Dubé, and joining us now, an expert in forensic accounting and financial investigations with more than 40 years of experience. He's testified as an expert in court. We have author Bill Jennings with us. Bill, let me start with you. Give us an idea of what the financial picture was for the Menendez family back in the 80s. Jose Menendez, we know, had a very high-powered job, and they were known as people who were extremely wealthy.
Yeah, a fair amount of reporting at the time that suggested that the Menendez brothers believed that the family estate was something in excess of $90 million, but they also apparently believed that $75 million of that was in a Swiss bank account, which has never been located. The end result was that sometime after the murder in August of 1989, the brothers received something between $14 and $15 million. The prosecutor alluded to not only inheriting cash and real estate and personal effects, but also the life insurance proceeds. However, by 1994, which is when the first trial was held, they had spent something between $10 and $11 million of that. And while they weren't convicted in the first trial, they were convicted less than 2 years later in 1996. But starting with the 1994 date, assuming that the reporting was correct, they would have had something in the neighborhood of $4 million. There was also the sale of a house, which probably netted something in excess of $1 million. I did sort of three scenarios. One is if they had put that money in a passbook savings account, depending on the financial institution, today that $4 million would be worth something between $6 and $7 million. If they had instead invested it or had someone invested in the S&P 500, it would be worth more than $70 million. And if they had invested in real estate in California, probably less likely, it would have been worth between $20 and $50 million.
Wow.
And so those are kind of three scenarios, but there's an interesting wrinkle to this.
Well, Bill, hold that thought. Yeah. I want to bring in Philip Dubé. I want to get to that interesting wrinkle, but Philip Dubé, let's add in the part of they are convicted killers, they've been behind bars. What happens to money and inheritance once you are convicted, especially convicted of killing the people who really accumulated that wealth?
Well, first of all, California has what we call the Slayer statute. It's codified in our probate code that essentially says that if you murder the testator as a beneficiary, you are statutorily disinherited. So legally, the brothers are entitled to zero, especially because they were convicted. But believe it or not, even if you're acquitted, it's a different standard in the probate courts if heirs or relatives wanted to go in and challenge any monetary disbursements to these boys. At the time, they could still show that they murdered their parents based on a preponderance or a clear and convincing standard. And if the probate judge makes that finding, you are disinherited. And I know that for the retrial, the boys at the time were broke. They were represented by court-appointed counsel. In fact, the public defender's office where I worked represented Lyle. He was represented by Terry Towery and Charles Gessler, who are both retired. I think Mr. Gessler has since passed away. And then Leslie Abramson was court-appointed as what we call Harris counsel to represent Erik. And what that meant was she was not paid by the client directly, but instead was paid what we call the panel rates by the Superior Court, which is obviously far less than what you would make in private practice. But she cared about her client and she wanted to keep up the continuity of representation and obviously agreed to the lower rate. And they had the finest representation that money could buy. So it was tragic, but right now they are from the wrong side of the tracks. When they get out, they will be indigent and they're going to have to start all over and making a go at it. But the good news is they're still young and robust enough where they can make a living.
Yeah, Philip, stand by. And Bill, I wanted you to finish talking about what's out there. Where do you think this money is? If it was disinherited by the only children, where does that money go?
I, of course, defer on that point to Mr. Dubé. So obviously, they would not receive any of that money, as best I could tell. But the interesting wrinkle is they have both married well, and they've been married. Lyle's been married twice, but even the second wife, he's been married more than 20 years, as has Erik. And their wives are both extremely successful women. Lyle's wife is an attorney that also has been very successful in investing in real estate and startups, and so has a net worth that's in the millions of dollars. And Erik's wife is a successful author and businesswoman. And she also has a net worth that would be in excess of $1 million. And so, presumably, at least initially, if they were to be released, the wives have independent wealth that they could access.
Wow, Bill Jennings, thank you so much for that analysis. I hope we see you again here on VPI. Philip Dubé is coming with us because we have more to talk about. The big question is, in all of this, we're talking about whether or not they're going to be released, but what is a judge actually going to do?
Did you ever consider not taking her, not killing her? You never intended to let her go.
Never.
Pure evil.
Interview with a Killer season premiere. Encore presentation next on Court TV.
Doomsday Cult mom is now lawyer Lori.
She's representing herself.
On charges of conspiring to murder her fourth husband.
She said, I can murder you now.
The Cult Mom Conspiracy Trial. Live coverage weekday mornings. Only on Court TV.
I've known Lyle and Erik my whole life. I can tell you without a doubt that they are not the villains they've been portrayed as. They were boys, young, scared, and abused by their father in ways no child should ever experience. You, the media, focus so much on their actions, but they never were told, they never were able to tell the full story of their abuse that drove them to such desperate measures. When I think about the pain and suffering they endured, it breaks my heart to know that the system failed them so profoundly. They tried to protect themselves the only way they knew how. But instead of being seen as victims, they were vilified.
Welcome back to Vinnie Politan Investigates. We are talking about the Menendez brothers. They're now in their 50s. It's been 3 decades, more than that, since they killed their parents and were convicted of that cold-blooded killing and were sentenced to life without parole. But what they want now is to be released. And someone that stands in their way is the District Attorney of Los Angeles. He's newly elected, Nathan Hochman, and he actually changed the position of that office to now not support resentencing. Here he is explaining that position.
The key issue of exhibiting insight, full insight into their crimes, and completely accepting responsibility for their actions. This is where the Menendezes, like Sirhan, also fall short. So if the Menendezes go ahead and want to, at any point, whether it's today, whether it's weeks from now, months from now, or years from now, finally and unequivocally express that they and acknowledge the lies that they have told and persisted in for over 30 years, then we will certainly evaluate the quality of that sincerity and decide whether or not it's real or fake, whether or not it's just designed to get out of jail, or whether or not they truly believe and acknowledge the full breadth of the crimes and lies they have told in deciding what to do at that point. And as importantly, the court will have to make that decision, and that decision is the court and the courts alone to make.
And the court is going to be making that decision. So that leads us to the next question in our investigation. What is the judge going to do with this resentencing? The question from not only the district attorney's office, but the criminal defense attorney and the family of the Menendez family, the parents of Lyle and Erik. Let's bring in our guests who are going to help us navigate what may be ahead in this case. Still with us is Philip Dubé, and also joining us now, we have retired Chief Judge of Florida's 9th Judicial Circuit. He presided over the Casey Anthony trial. Judge Belvin Perry is here. Thank you both for being on. And Judge Perry, I want to start with you. You're no stranger to a high-profile case, one that just sends the public into a frenzy. Are you surprised that the Menendez brothers' case is still something that's in the media and now inside of a courtroom?
It doesn't surprise me when you look at the facts surrounding this case, the brutality of the murder, and then the allegations about abuse by the parents. Those type of cases develop a life of themselves.
Do you think this judge is going to side with what the first district attorney wanted in this case, supporting resentencing, Judge Perry? Or do you think that he is going to take it under advisement and perhaps side with the new district attorney?
Well, I think the judge is going to do a number of things. First of all, he's going to look at the nature and severity of the offense that sent them to prison. He's going to look at the circumstances of the crime. He's going to look at each defendant's role. He's going to look at mitigating factors. He's going to look at their prior criminal history. They were aged 21 and 18 at the time. And he's also going to look at their prison records to see whether or not they were good guys or bad guys while in prison. Another thing he's going to look at is whether or not they pose a risk if they are released. And several other factors that he will look at. It's kind of difficult to say whether he's going to take sides, but I think he's going to do a thorough analysis of the facts to see whether or not they should be resentenced, looking at those factors I've just outlined.
Philip Dubé, you are very familiar with how things work in Los Angeles County and California. Tell me what you think about this judge and whether he's going to be favorable to DA Hochman or whether he's going to listen to those who dissent.
Well, first of all, short of a DNA exoneration, I am unaware of any case since our resentencing statute was enacted where an inmate serving life without parole was resentenced to time served or to life with parole. I'm just not aware of it. There might be situations where there were juveniles who were granted relief as youthful offenders at the time of their crime, but here we have grown adults who were adults at the time of the offense. What I can tell you about this judge, and I've never appeared in front of him, by all accounts, he will absolutely follow the law. And what is the first clue or the first indication that he will? Because he He put the DA's office's feet to the fire at the last hearing for authority that would justify them withdrawing their petition seeking the resentencing. And they sort of stammered and stuttered and danced around the issue, and they really couldn't come up with true legal authority. And the court is allowing this petition to go forward. So that's good news. So he doesn't just throw in the towel because it's an unpopular decision to make. So he will hear this out, and they can take evidence. They can submit doctor's reports. They're going to look at what's called his C file. That means his correctional file, to see if there have been any write-ups, any type of disciplinary type infractions, anything like that at all. Is he rehabilitated within the prison system? And if the court finds that it would be in the interest of justice based on these post-conviction factors, the court can do a few things. The court can give him time served and cut him loose right there. Just literally find them guilty, vacate the first-degree murders, the special circumstance allegation, and sentence them based on a voluntary manslaughter, which back then with the gun enhancements only carried 26 years. And they're done. They never have to look back. Alternatively, the court can reduce it to life with parole, and then, as I said in the earlier block, punt it to parole. And then parole will make the assessment as to whether or not they pose a risk to society. And the good news is they will get periodic reviews before the parole board if they're denied in the first go-around. But the good news is at least they will be eligible for a hearing, and their lives are not just thrown away with what we call an LWOP disposition, life without parole. So there's definitely hope here. If I was a betting man, these men are going home.
Judge Perry, when we're talking about rehabilitation, and DA Nathan Hochman, he wants them to say what they did wrong. He wants them to publicly own their lies and anything that they said in the last trial where they were convicted. How do you determine as a judge whether someone is truly rehabilitated?
Well, first of all, you look at their record while they were in prison. And then you look at what efforts or programs that they participated while they were in prison trying to change their life. If I, too, was a betting man, I would predict that this judge, after hearing all the facts, listening to the family, knowing that there's animosity between the former DA and this present DA, that he will probably reduce the sentence to life with parole. And as the colleague just said, throw it in the hands of the parole board.
So that's 2 for 2, that we might see something short of them being fully released. Judge Perry, I want to give you the last word on this, because I'm sure you remember when this trial happened and just how much attention it got. Do you think the sexual assault that they claimed when it comes to their father, whether that's going to weigh into the judge's decision or not?
I think it will weigh heavily in the judge's decision in this particular case, since you have relatives who have talked about this. So yes, I think it would be a part of his decision.
Judge Belvin Perry, Philip Dubé, thank you so much for being on with us and for sharing your analysis and time as we look at this case, one that for the last 3 decades where they've been behind bars, the public hasn't stopped being interested in what happened in not only 1989, but what's going to happen to them in the future. And that attention maybe what led to this moment of a possible resentencing. But ultimately, it's going to be that judge, a neutral party, who is tasked with ignoring outside influence to have the final say. We'll keep you updated on this case here on VPI. For those of you watching Vinnie Politan Investigates at night, Interview with a Killer is up next. Gary Michael Hilton, also known as the National Forest serial killer, makes a chilling confession to host David Scott. A confession to a murder he hasn't been charged with yet. And for those viewers watching in the morning, stay tuned for opening statements with Julie Grant.